So let's take our working file, contacts with samples, and have a look at what a pivot table actually is. Well, in this file we have a number of sheets, the biggest of which is the contact sheet, and this contains 18,000 and some records of people who have been customers for the current company. What the pivot table allows us to do is effectively summarize that data, because with 18,500 and something rows, that is a lot of information, and we just want to read some of the statistics out of it. So we've created 3 sample pivot tables here, so you can see what a pivot table actually does. So in example 1, on sample 1 sheet, you can see we are summarizing for each city the total purchase YTD. So from our data, what that does is it goes along to the total purchase, this column here, sums every value within that column, but based on a filter of the city, which is here. So it goes through, it sorts them by city, and then groups the cities together to give me a total for each city. So Ballard, or people from Ballard, not the actual town, have spent $181,236 in the year to date. And we can go through and see it's done that for all of the cities. So we've done a summary. Sample 2 is a shorter summary because we're now summing the same information but by country. So again, it looks in the contacts data, finds the country column, which is this one here, groups all of our customers by country, and then adds up their purchases YTD. That way we get a grand total for each country. So the United States, or people from the United States, have spent $37.6 million with us. We're able to summarize data, and in fact able to summarize that data very quickly. Now here, in sample 3, we've gone a little bit different in that we've used 2 of the columns of our data. We've used the yearly income, which has people bracketed by their annual income, and we've used children at home, and you can see here we've got 0 to 5 for the number of children each of our customers has at home. Where the 2 values meet, so somebody, for example, who has no children at home, but falls into the 25,001 to 50,000 annual income bracket, we have sold $23.5 million worth of items. We're able to do crosstabs effectively. We take 2 of the columns, we sort of group the values within those columns, and that gives us our column headings for yearly income and our row headings for children at home. And where they meet, we then sum, in this case, the total purchase YTD. Now in each of these pivot tables, you'll notice that there's a pivot table field option on the right that when we click out of the pivot table is no longer visible. That's only there when we have a pivot table. How do we create a pivot table? Well, we start with the initial data, our contacts information. We then simply click anywhere in the data and go to Insert, Pivot Table. One click. What Excel does then is it highlights the data, so you can see little marching ants are around the data, and it's picked up the data range here. Contact sheet, everything from A1 to AE 18,509. So I therefore have 18,508 records because the first row are just headings. Where do we want to place this pivot table? Well, in a new worksheet, please, rather than an existing one, and OK. Pivot table then appears, but there's nothing in it. It doesn't look like any of the samples we've just looked at, because Excel doesn't know which of the columns we wish to use for either the row headings or the column headings, or the data where they meet. That's all controlled over here in the little pivot table fields dialog box. The upper section here contains all of the column names, so it's important that your data has a column name so that you can spot it in this list a lot easier. We then need to decide which of our columns, so I'm going to go for city, I need in my various parts of the pivot table, which are broken down into 4 sections. The rows, so what values will build the rows for my pivot table. Columns, what values will build the columns for my pivot table. The values, what field contains the numeric values that I wish to calculate. So in our case, sales or perhaps average number of children. We don't know what we want to work out at this moment, but any calculation would go there where there's a match between the row and the column. Now you don't need to put something in both rows and columns or in either. The only field really that is required is the values to tell the pivot table to do some kind of calculation. There is then also an additional option here for filters, but we'll explore those a little later. For the moment, I'm interested in doing my first pivot table. I go up here and grab the field that I want, which is city, and drag it down here until I get to this section I wish to be in, which is rows, and let go. And you can see I then get 1 row for each distinct value in the city column. Although I have 18,500 records, I don't have 18,500 cities. I have in fact 277. I'll actually take away the fact we didn't start at row 277 for 273 cities. I then need to decide what I want in the values. Well, it looked quite good when we used this total purchase YTD, so I take hold of that field. Keep in hold, I drag that down to where I want to be, which is the values, and let go. And you can see then it sums the total purchase YTD. Now the pivot table will assume sum if we drop a numeric field into the values, and it will assume count if we drop a text field into the values. For example, I could drag this field out by dragging it into the top section and letting go. I could actually take the city field and drop that into the values, and you'll see it now goes for count of city rather than sum of city. And that way we'll see how many of our customers are in each of the cities. There's quite a few in Beaverton and Bellflower, and then some of the others have a few numbers and then some higher numbers. That was a big one. Paris, 1,544 customers in Paris. Really, we can drop any field in here. It doesn't have to be a numeric field. If we drop a text field in, it assumes count, and it will count how many records are in that particular column. Let's go back to where I was after, which is total purchase YTD. Drop that in here, and then these numbers should be the same as our sample one. 181236. The formatting isn't, but the data is. That's a straightforward, simple pivot table. You start in the data, click into the data, insert pivot table. As long as the data has no blank columns, it will pick all the data up, just as we've seen previously in Excel. OK. This then creates you a new pivot table structure in a new sheet, into which you then decide which of your columns you wish to use. So you wish to summarize. It may be that I wish to take the marital status into the rows, and there's only two, married or single, and I'd like to just count. Let's take the text field, which is marital status, and it will then count the marital status. We have 40,100 that are married, 33,932 that are single, giving us our grand total of 74,032. That gets you started on pivot tables. The next stage is formatting, multiple columns, lots of summaries, drilling down, lots of little things that we can do in our pivot tables to both customize and make the most use of them. This first stage then has been to get you started.